The Man Who Died with a Smile. Inspector Pubright, BBC radio drama Market Hill, at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, was behaving exactly as tradition dictated, without urgency, without glamour, and with just enough bustle to suggest that something useful might eventually occur if given sufficient time. The greengrocer was shifting his carrots a precise half-inch forward every few minutes, convinced this encouraged custom. Two elderly ladies inspected cauliflowers with an air of deep betrayal. A dog slept under a stall, dreaming with its tail. Which is why Mr. Edwin Perks should not have been smiling. He sat on the public bench facing the statue of Alderman Rusby. His posture was neat, almost ceremonial, hands folded over a folded chronicle. His bowler hat rested perfectly straight, as though he had adjusted it even at the moment of death, which, of course, he very likely had not. But the smile, small and serene, tugged at the corner of his lips like a private joke. It was Mrs. Glossop who first noticed. She had been marching toward the butcher's stall with all the gravity of a parliamentary delegation when she halted mid-stride, squinted, and declared in a voice pitched for maximum public efficiency, Edwin Perks ought not to be looking quite that pleased with himself. People turned. People always turned when Mrs. Glossop spoke. It saved them the trouble of waiting for news to reach them by natural means. Within 10 seconds, a small cluster had formed, half curious, half gratified, to witness something mildly improper before Elevenses. "Is he asleep?" whispered Mrs. Blenkinsop, who approached all problems with the hopeful assumption that they might go away if called something else. "Not unless he sleeps sitting bolt upright with his shoes pointing 2 different ways," said Mr. Cosgrove, the greengrocer, leaning forward. "And look at his hand, relaxed as a Sunday cat." Relaxed, yes, but also strangely askew. The folded newspaper, though tidy, was creased in a precise triangular pattern. Such a fold was not typical of Edwin Perks, a man known for creasing every document as though preparing it for museum display. It was around this time that Police Constable Harrowby arrived, wearing the mildly flustered expression of a man who rarely encountered serious events before lunch. "Well then," he said, gazing at the figure on the bench, "he does seem a bit, finished." "Finished?" Mrs. Glossop snorted. "He's deceased, man. Look at his smile. Nobody in Flaxborough smiles like that unless they've won something or died doing it." Harrowby cleared his throat. "Let's not jump to conclusions." Purbright, arriving shortly thereafter, did not jump to anything at all. He paused several yards away, observing the bench, the shoes, the hat, the folded paper, and, though he said nothing, the unmistakable satisfaction on the late solicitor's face. "Morning, sir," Harrowby said, grateful for senior assistance. "We believe he passed peacefully." Purbright regarded the body thoughtfully. "He does convey a certain contentment," he said, "though I'm not sure Mr. Perks was known for it." "No, sir," Mrs. Blenkinsop volunteered. "Edwin Perks always looked as though someone had taken his favourite biscuit." Purbright stepped closer. The shoes, now visible in better detail, were indeed muddy, a damp brown at the edges despite the stone-dry morning, and the fact that Perks rarely walked anywhere that might disturb his polished footwear. "And he was last seen where?" Purbright asked. "At the post office," said Cosgrove. 8:30 seemed normal, though he did look about a bit. "What sort of looking about?" "The sort that ends just before someone tells you off for staring," Cosgrove replied. Purbright nodded. "And the newspaper?" "Folded oddly," Harrowby said, as though making a confession. Purbright lifted it delicately. "Yes, exactly triangular, crisp and deliberate." It reminded him of something, though the thought skittered away before he could grasp it. The crowd grew thicker, emboldened by the sight of something out of the ordinary happening to someone else. Speculation sprouted like weeds. "Heart attack," declared Mrs. Glossop. "Peaceful passing," murmured Mrs. Blenkinsop. "Ecstasy," said Mr. Cosgrove, who always suspected dramatic explanations hid behind ordinary ones. Purbright allowed the chatter to continue. Gossip was often more revealing than interrogation. "Constable," he said quietly, "let's move Mr. Perks when the doctor arrives. In the meantime, please ensure nobody decides to offer medical theories involving curses, thunderclaps, or improperly stored fish." Harrowby opened his mouth, found no adequate reply, and nodded. Purbright took a slow circuit around the bench. On the ground near its right side lay a tiny smear of blue thread, almost too small to notice. A scarf, a sash, most likely lint from someone's coat. But he stored it quietly in a paper envelope. When he turned, he saw Mrs. Glossop staring at him with the fierce curiosity of a hawk evaluating a field mouse. "Well?" she demanded. "What do you think?" "I think," Purbright said gently, "that Mr. Perks was not expecting to spend his morning here." "That much is obvious," she snapped. "But," Purbright continued, "I think he may have expected to meet someone." The crowd inhaled collectively. "Who?" asked three voices at once. "That," Purbright replied, "is what we shall endeavour to learn." He looked again at the serene, inexplicable smile. There was nothing threatening in it, nothing sinister. Yet it did not belong to a man who simply stopped living. It suggested conclusion, privately enjoyed victory, or perhaps resignation. "Sir," Harrowby whispered, "do you think foul play?" Purbright sighed softly, eyes on the folded triangular newspaper. "I think," he said, "that Mr. Perks is telling us something. We've simply yet to understand the language." The morning resumed its slow crawl. Market Hill continued selling fruit, vegetables, and the illusion of routine. But now it did so around a man who had died with a smile, and in Flaxborough, smiles rarely came without a reason. Whatever that reason was, Purbright intended to find it. By mid-afternoon, the news of Edwin Perks's oddly serene departure had spread through Flaxborough with the efficiency of a well-practiced choir passing along a hymn. Few details remained unembellished. Some versions of the tale included a mysterious woman, others replaced her with a parcel, an envelope, or, in one highly embroidered rendition, a small marmalade cat. All, however, retained the defining feature: the smile. A smile on a dead man, as Mrs. Glossop declared repeatedly to anyone who had 5 spare minutes, was not natural, not dignified, and probably not English. The Market Hill tea rooms, a low-beamed sanctuary of tepid comfort, became the unofficial tribunal for interpreting Perks's expression. It was there that Miss Daffodil Feathers, the organist at St. Anselm's, claimed to have glimpsed Perks only an hour before he was found, walking quite briskly and with purpose, unusual for Edwin, who normally walked as though competing with his own shadow, but refusing to win. Her claim introduced a complication because Mr. Cosgrove maintained he had seen Perks heading toward the post office at nearly the same time. Mrs. Blenkinsop swore she overheard him whistling outside the haberdashery a little later, though this was widely dismissed, as Mrs. Blenkinsop had mistaken a startled pigeon for a soprano last week. Purbright, listening to the drifting accounts, felt the narrative bend improbably. Multiple sightings of the same man in different places at nearly the same moment often indicated exaggeration, but occasionally suggested deliberate misdirection. Flaxborough preferred embellishment to deceit, but even its citizens could, under certain circumstances, slide unintentionally into something resembling the latter. He returned to the police station where Sergeant Malley sat at his desk, brow furrowed in a fashion that implied he was considering something extremely complex, though in truth he was merely wrestling with the stapler again. "Anything new?" Purbright asked. "Only that Mrs. Vantage insists she saw Mr. Perks alive at 9:45, Mally replied, freeing the stapler from its own mechanism with a triumphant snap. "Says he tipped his hat to her." "Mrs. Vantage is nearly blind," Purbright murmured. "She would likely mistake the statue of Alderman Rusby for a living acquaintance if he were wearing a scarf." "Yes, sir, but she seemed certain." "Certainty," Purbright said, "is rarely the same as accuracy." He took a seat, laid the triangularly folded chronicle on the table, and stared at it. The shape, it bothered him. Not merely a quirk, something purposeful. Perks was methodical. He folded things in squares, neat rectangles, never triangles. This triangle, sharp, even, deliberate, was a message of some kind. But the language of such a message was not yet clear. Cosgrove said he looked around as though being watched, Mally offered. Purbright tapped the paper lightly. Or as though he was looking for someone. "And the thread you found?" "Blue," Purbright said. "A peculiar shade, could be from a scarf or a sash. Not many wear sashes these days." "No," Purbright agreed. "But some still do in their professional capacity." Mally blinked. "Barristers?" "Among others." A silence followed, gentle but promising. Purbright felt the familiar tremor of inquiry taking shape, not rushed, not forced, just quietly aligning itself like an image resolving in fog. Before he could pursue the thought further, P.C. Harrowby entered, hair slightly askew, expression deeply apologetic. "Sir, there's more?" Purbright raised an eyebrow. "More than a dead man smiling?" "Mrs. Glossop says Mr. Perks was seen arguing yesterday with someone outside the bookshop. She couldn't see who. It was raining, she says, but she heard raised voices." "Mrs. Glossop hears raised voices even when people are silent," Mally muttered. "Yes, but this time," Harrowby insisted, "she said she heard Perks say, 'You will not like what I have to show you.'" Purbright considered this. "Did she say when the argument occurred?" "Late afternoon. She was sheltering under the bookshop awning because she didn't want to ruin her new hat." "Of course," Purbright said dryly. The pieces, though few, were beginning to tilt toward a pattern. Perks expecting someone. Perks possibly carrying something. And Perks folding his newspaper in an unusual way, as though marking it, signaling or hiding something inside. "Has the doctor given his preliminary opinion?" Purbright asked. "Natural causes," Harrowby said. "Heart stopped. Nothing suspicious." Purbright's gaze drifted again to the small, satisfied curve of Perks's lips. Natural causes do not usually inspire such contentment. "There are worse ways to go," Mally offered. "My uncle died falling out of a cherry tree." "Let us hope Mr. Perks kept his feet on the ground," Purbright replied. That evening the town, dignified in its routines, continued to orbit the day's central puzzle. In the snug of the King's Arms, patrons debated whether Perks had been visited by an epiphany or indigestion. At the library, Miss Pomeroy insisted he had been reading a book about Eastern philosophies, and therefore might have embraced serenity at the final moment. At the post office, Mr. Duckett, the least imaginative of men, concluded Perks had simply fallen asleep and done it too thoroughly. But amid the speculative fog, something firmer began to emerge. Near closing time, Purbright decided on a short detour past the Market Hill bench. A sense of place mattered. The stone was cool, the evening still. The statue of Alderman Rusby loomed above like an unimpressed schoolmaster. Purbright imagined Perks sitting here only hours earlier, waiting, watching, smiling at something that never quite arrived or arrived too late. He lowered himself to the bench. The angle of the seat, the view of the square, the sound of distant church bells, none offered revelation. Not yet. But as he looked down, his eye caught a faint scuff mark on the ground. A second one, almost parallel. Someone had stood here, feet turned slightly outward, perhaps leaning in to speak. Not for long, the marks were shallow, but long enough. Purbright straightened. Someone had met Perks that morning. Someone whose presence had left almost no trace except a whisper of blue thread, a scuff of leather, and the faint tremor of secrecy now stirring through town. As he walked back toward the station, the lamps glowing faintly against the dusk, he felt the inquiry shift. The smile was no longer the puzzle, it was now the invitation to look closer. And Purbright, as always, accepted such invitations with quiet determination. Morning arrived with a pallid, undecided sky that seemed to share the town's reluctance to acknowledge anything as dramatic as a suspicious death. Flaxborough seldom welcomed excitement. It preferred its scandals diluted and gently warmed, like the weak tea served at the council canteen. Yet Edwin Perks's smile had unsettled the usual equilibrium. Even the pigeons appeared unusually contemplative. Inspector Purbright arrived at the station to find Sergeant Malley already at his desk, hunched over a stack of forms that appeared to be attempting to escape him. He looked up with relief at the sound of footsteps. "Sir, I've been going through Mr. Perks's professional files, what we have access to, that is." His clerk handed over a list of ongoing matters, mostly routine things. Wills, conveyances, land boundaries, a dispute about a pear tree that apparently leans in a morally threatening manner toward a neighbour's shed. "Flaxborough's great battles," Purbright murmured, removing his coat. "Anything that might inspire enmity of a more vigorous sort?" Malley tapped a sheet. "This. A delayed inheritance claim, a small estate left by a Mr. Lionel Hoxie. His nephew, Horace Pym, has been pressing for quick resolution. Perks had slowed it down, claimed missing documentation." "Ah," Purbright said gently. "The impatient air. Any indication Pym confronted Perks?" "According to Perks's assistant, yes, loudly, twice, and once in writing." "Writing?" Purbright repeated with quiet satisfaction. "Is often the more revealing of tempers." Malley hesitated. "Sir, Pym isn't exactly violent. He's mostly..." "Well, mostly what, Sergeant?" "A man who apologizes when someone steps on his foot." Purbright gave the faintest smile. "Even the mildest men possess tempers. They simply store them in more unusual cupboards." He reached for his hat. "Let's have a word with Mr. Pym." The council offices were only beginning to stir into bureaucratic life when Purbright and Malley arrived. They found Horace Pym at his desk, a narrow man whose entire demeanour suggested he feared accidentally offending the furniture. His hair, sandy and uncertain, lay flat in a manner that implied it had surrendered early in life. When Purbright introduced himself, Pym sprang upright like a startled heron. "Inspector, I didn't expect—" "Do sit down, or stand, if you prefer standing. Oh dear." Purbright settled into the offered chair. "Mr. Pym, I understand you were awaiting the settlement of your uncle's estate." Pym gave a small, miserable nod. "Yes, Inspector, it's been terribly delayed. I don't like to speak ill of the deceased, but Mr. Perks was particular, always asking for more forms or new statements. I sometimes wondered if he simply disliked my handwriting." "Did you quarrel with him?" "Quarrel?" Pym squeaked. "Good heavens, no, I merely spoke sternly, in a low voice, mostly." Mrs. Cranley at the solicitor's office recalls raised voices. Pym went rather pink. "Raised in the sense of audible? I wasn't shouting, not exactly." Malley, perhaps unintentionally, looked doubtful. Purbright leaned back slightly. "You were seen visiting him 3 days before his death." "Yes. I wanted to know why he insisted on this mysterious missing paper. If the document was lost, why not simply proceed? It's only a modest estate." Uncle Lionel had few possessions, a gramophone, 5 rather ugly oil paintings, and a savings account that he guarded like a zoo crocodile. And Mr. Perks? He said he couldn't finalize until he found the missing affidavit. He insisted he'd seen it once. He even described the handwriting. But then he couldn't find it again. He blamed poor filing. And did you believe him? Pym hesitated. Inspector, I don't like to speak out of turn, but Mr. Perks had been distracted lately, not himself. In what way? He looked worried, preoccupied, as if he expected someone to appear behind him at any moment. Purbright exchanged a glance with Mally. And did he say whom he feared? Purbright asked. Oh, no, he never said fear, just unease, perhaps, I'm not sure. Our last conversation ended oddly. Oddly? He told me, Pym said, voice dropping, that I should stop pressing him, that certain matters were not as simple as they appeared. I asked what he meant, but he only sighed and said I would understand soon. Purbright studied the man. Nervous, eager, fretful, yes. A liar? No. A murderer? Even less likely. Pym was the sort who would faint at the sight of his own outrage. You heard of Mr. Perks's death? Purbright asked gently. Pym nodded, swallowing hard. Terrible thing, and if I may say so, disturbing, Inspector. They say he was smiling. Why would he smile? That, Purbright said, rising, is what we are trying to discover. As they left the office, Mally whispered, He's too jumpy for murder. Jumpy men can be surprisingly determined when cornered, Purbright replied. But Mr. Pym seems too worried about being impolite to commit anything drastic. Still, resentment is resentment. They walked slowly through the high street, where shop windows reflected the mild bustle of the day. Several residents paused to offer condolences about Perks with the enthusiasm usually reserved for discussing cabbage prices. Each had a theory. Each theory contradicted the last. Flaxborough's talent for narrative embroidery was flourishing spectacularly. A passing remark caught Purbright's ear. Mrs. Dalrymple, carrying 3 bags of shopping, was telling a friend, Perks wasn't himself. He snapped at the librarian last week. The librarian. And he was seen tearing up some paper in the alley behind the bookshop, looking as though he'd swallowed a lemon. Purbright slowed. Excuse me, Mrs. Dalrymple, did he say anything? Oh, Inspector, no, I only saw him tear it up. Small sheet, white, looked furious with it. He stuffed the pieces in his pocket and marched off. Did you see where he went? Toward the market hill, I think. Hard to say, I was juggling my haddock. She hurried on, leaving Purbright with a fragment more tantalizing than the fish. Back at the station, Purbright placed the triangularly folded chronicle on his desk once more. If Perks had torn up a paper days earlier and folded another in that strange, triangular form, was he using his newspaper to carry something, conceal something, signal something, or had someone else placed something inside it? Mally returned from the front office. Sir, the clerk from Perks's office says Perks received a visitor the morning of his death. Did not give a name. Tall, wearing a coat with a bright-coloured scarf. A scarf, Purbright repeated softly. Blue. She thought red or green or blue. Hard to be sure. She said the colour looked important. Important colours often blur in memory, Purbright murmured. He tapped the newspaper again. A visitor, a torn paper, an inheritance dispute, and a man who looked over his shoulder with unease. Several motives hovered, yet none quite aligned with the serene smile on the bench. But someone had met Perks that morning, and Purbright intended to find the one person in Flaxborough whose memory of colour did not shift like fog. Purbright found himself walking toward the solicitor's office again, not because he expected revelations to fall neatly into his hands, but because, returning, to the scene of quiet confusion often teased loose threads that had gone unnoticed the first time. The late morning sunlight sat thinly on the street, lending the cobblestones a chalky pallor. Flaxborough looked as though it were holding its breath, not in alarm, but in nosy anticipation. Inside Perks and Blundy, solicitors, the atmosphere remained unchanged, a faint scent of old paper, polish, and the restrained despair familiar to all legal establishments. Miss Cranley, the assistant, was typing with a severity that suggested every letter was a personal rebuke. She looked up when Purbright entered. "Oh," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Inspector, I suppose you want more about Mr. Perks." "Just a little," Purbright replied. "Something's not quite aligned yet." Miss Cranley sniffed, though whether at the situation or the memory of Perks himself was uncertain. "Mr. Perks was particular," she said. "Particular about his files, particular about punctuality, particular about everyone else's lack of particularity." Purbright folded his hands calmly. "You mentioned he had a visitor the morning he died." "Yes, came in just after we opened, tall, wrapped in a coat and that colourful scarf." She frowned. "Blue, I think, or green. At any rate, it clashed." "Did you hear anything of their conversation?" "Not much, just voices, one sharp, the other fairly quiet. Then Mr. Perks asked the visitor to lower their tone. He didn't like raised voices in the office, said it upset the paper." "Upset the paper?" "His phrase, not mine," she said primly. "And what did they argue about?" Miss Cranley hesitated, fingers pausing on the typewriter keys. "Something about a document." Mr. Perks said, "I told you already I cannot proceed until I find it." Then the visitor said something I couldn't make out, but it sounded threatening in a very polite manner. "Polite threats are often the most serious," Purbright murmured. Miss Cranley leaned slightly forward. "Inspector." Mr. Perks wasn't frightened exactly. He was irritated. That's how he gets when he feels cornered. "Did he mention the missing document afterward?" "Yes. He said he had to check the storage room again. He said if he couldn't find it where he expected, then there was only one explanation, but then he stopped, as if he'd said more than intended." Purbright nodded. "One explanation," he repeated. "Interesting." He left the office with the faint rustle of the triangular newspaper still in his coat pocket. The folds were too deliberate for an absent-minded moment. Someone had touched that paper with intention. Whether Perks or his visitor, the fold signified something more than tidiness. As he stepped onto the street, he observed the subtle shift in town behaviour that always followed unusual news. People spoke in softer voices, yet with keener eyes. Faces lingered on doorsteps longer. Children were shooed indoors without explanation. And in the midst of it all, rumours sprouted like overwatered cress. The bookshop was only a short walk away, the place where Mrs. Glossop had claimed she overheard that argument the day before Perks's death. When Purbright entered, a bell tinkled with a weariness common to bells that had endured decades of half-hearted enthusiasm from customers. Mr. Blee, the bookseller, looked up from a stack of paperbacks. "Morning, Inspector," he said with mild suspicion, as if law enforcement might at any moment inquire about overdue books. "I'm following up a report," Purbright said. "An argument behind your shop yesterday, between Mr. Perks and an unidentified person." "Oh, yes," Blee said. "I heard it myself, not the words, mind, just the tone. Mr. Perks sounded annoyed, which is not rare for him. The other voice was slippery." "Slippery?" As if the speaker was smiling while arguing. "It's unsettling, that. And you didn't see the person?" "No, but I saw a sleeve, navy blue, wool, expensive sort of weave, not the kind common around here." "A sleeve," Purbright repeated, filing it neatly in his mind alongside the blue thread. "Yes." Person moved quickly, didn't want to be seen. He thanked the bookseller and stepped back into the street, the clues aligning themselves not in clarity but in direction. A visitor with a colourful scarf, possibly blue, a navy sleeve seen the day before, a document Perks believed missing, and an irritation that bordered on unease. What nested beneath those details was something else. The idea that Perks's irritation wasn't caused by a trivial misfiled sheet, but by what the missing paper represented. He returned to Market Hill, drawn by the stillness of the bench where Perks had sat. A shopkeeper noticed him and nodded in greeting. "Nasty business, Inspector," the man called. "Dead man smiling, gives one the shivers." "Indeed," Purbright replied. He approached the bench, imagining again Perks's final moments, not in melodrama, but in quiet realism. The solicitor had come here after leaving his office. He had been expecting someone. The triangular newspaper might have been a signal, a container, a marker of an arrangement. Had he meant to hand something over, or receive something? Purbright sat down, mirroring the man's posture. He looked at the surrounding stalls, the path leading from the solicitor's office, the alley from the bookshop. Perks might have walked through any of them, worrying at the folded paper in his hand. He unfolded the Chronicle once more, laying it across his knee. Beneath the fold he found nothing, a perfectly ordinary page. But that was almost the strongest clue. A man so meticulous would not fold a newspaper at random. If something had been inside it, it was gone now. Purbright breathed out slowly. Someone had removed whatever Perks carried. Mally appeared from across the square, holding a small notebook. "Sir, just spoke to the librarian. She said Perks visited twice last week, both times asking for the same reference book. Something on handwriting analysis." "Handwriting?" Purbright asked. "Yes, sir. Apparently he was comparing signatures. She thought he looked rather troubled by what he saw." Purbright stared ahead, mind sifting rapidly. A missing affidavit, signatures, a dispute about inheritance, a man seen tearing up a paper, a visitor who argued with him about proceeding. The thread connecting them was becoming visible, thin but unmistakable. He stood, pocketed the newspaper, and buttoned his coat. "Sergeant," he said, "we need to speak with Mr. Perks's clerk again. And then we must obtain every document relating to Mr. Hoxie's estate." "You think the missing paper—" "I think," Purbright replied, "that Mr. Perks may have discovered something someone very much wished he hadn't." The breeze stirred faintly, carrying with it a hint of brewing trouble. And somewhere in Flaxborough, the person who had last spoken to Edwin Perks still believed their secret remained safe. The afternoon settled over Flaxborough with a muted heaviness, the kind that suggested the town was trying to overhear its own secrets. Purbright walked with unhurried purpose toward Tanner's Lane, a narrow street whose houses leaned together like conspirators, sharing a confidence. It was here that Miss Vesper Dale lived, the eccentric music tutor whose presence had been mentioned more than once in connection with Perks. Her name carried an air of melodrama quite at odds with Flaxborough's usual temperament, which made her an irresistible figure in the town's whispered theories. Her house stood midway down the lane, an old brick structure with lace curtains that appeared to judge passers-by. As Purbright knocked, he heard a piano inside tumble through a flourish that sounded suspiciously like Chopin attempting to escape. Miss Dale opened the door abruptly. She was a woman of indeterminate middle age, wrapped in a shawl printed with musical notes. Her eyes were sharp, bright, and faintly amused, as though she expected the world to produce entertainment at a moment's notice. "Inspector Purbright?" she said, her voice rising theatrically. "How delightful. Do come in. I suppose this is about poor Mr. Perks and his expression?" "Among other things," Purbright replied, stepping inside. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and old sheet music. Piles of musical scores perched on every available surface, threatening collapse in a soft avalanche of minor chords. Miss Dale clasped her hands dramatically. "I adored Mr. Perks, you know. Not romantically, of course. He had the emotional appeal of a tax ledger, but he was unfailingly polite when rejecting my requests to teach him the piano." "You had disagreements with him recently," Purbright said gently. She sighed. "Yes, but only in the way a bird disagrees with a window. I simply wished him to speak to the council about the noise complaints from Mrs. Hedgeworth. She believes my piano is an instrument of torture. I told her if she wished to hear torture, she should attend her nephew's violin recitals." "And Mr. Perks refused to intervene?" "He said he handled legal matters, not acoustical combat." She rolled her eyes. "We exchanged only mild irritation, Inspector, hardly murderous tension. Yet a neighbour claims she saw you arguing with him outside your home." "Arguing?" Miss Dale looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, that. I merely asked if he'd received my letter, the one explaining Mrs. Hedgeworth's exaggerated complaints. I may have raised my voice a little, but only to compete with the dustman." Purbright noted her ease, or the appearance of it. "Did he mention any concerns to you, any worries?" Miss Dale hesitated. A subtle shift, almost imperceptible, crossed her face. "Well, he did seem troubled last week. He asked whether I had ever mislaid something important. I said yes, my patients, frequently. He did not laugh. Then he said, 'Some things once lost are better left unfound.' That is an unusual remark." "Indeed, but he was a solicitor. They often say things that sound profound until you realize they are simply avoiding a topic." "Did he mention a specific document?" "No, just looked over his shoulder twice, as though expecting someone to tap him there." Purbright absorbed this silently. "And on the morning of his death?" "I didn't see him," she said. "I was tutoring a dreadful child who plays the piano as if trying to punish it." "Did you perhaps pass near Market Hill later?" "I did," she admitted, "but only around 11. By which time the entire town was buzzing like a wasp in a jam jar." "Did you see anyone suspicious?" She shook her head. "Though I saw someone walking very briskly from the direction of Perks's office earlier that morning. A person in a bright scarf, quite impossible to miss, wouldn't make eye contact. Seemed urgent." "Colour?" "Ah," she said with a flourish, "at last a question suited to my talents. The scarf was teal." "Teal?" Purbright repeated. "Yes, teal. One of those colours that can look green in sunlight and blue indoors. The wearer walked with purpose, as though late for a confession." "Man or woman?" "Couldn't tell. Coat was long, stride confident." He left Miss Dale's with a polite bow and the distinct sense that she enjoyed mysteries more than music. The detail of the teal scarf fitted neatly, almost too neatly, into the growing pattern of contradictory colours others had reported. Red, green, blue, teal. Memory had a habit of rearranging truth, but the consistency across accounts was that the scarf was conspicuously bright. He walked slowly through town, replaying the fragments, a missing affidavit, a solicitor troubled by a discovery, a visitor with a distinctive scarf arguing in the office, Perks asking Miss Dale about lost things, and someone fleeing afterward. Before returning to the station, Purbright decided on a small detour. He approached the alley behind the bookshop, where Perks had been seen tearing up a piece of paper. The alley was narrow, shadowed, flanked by weathered brick. A cat perched on a dustbin eyed him with suspicion, as if evaluating whether he intended to disturb its meditation. Purbright crouched to examine the ground. No remnants of paper remained, but there was a faint smear of ink on the wall, a hurried gesture, perhaps from someone clutching a sheet. He imagined Perk standing here, agitated, tearing something that could not remain whole, something he feared might fall into the wrong hands. Across the alley, a shop door opened, and Mrs. Portwhistle peered out. Inspector? You're looking for trouble in all the places it likes to hide. Just retracing steps, Purbright replied. She sniffed. Well, if it's the tall person in the bright scarf you're after, I saw them pass this way. Early, very early. What time, Mrs. Portwhistle? Before 8, I was washing the doorstep. They walked quick as sin, looked over their shoulder once. Could you tell if it was a man? Oh, I could tell, she said with satisfaction. It was a woman. Purbright gave a thoughtful nod. Another contradictory certainty, but this one delivered with the firm conviction of a woman whose doorstep was spotless every morning. He returned to the station and found Mally reviewing Perks's files with the solemnity of a man attempting to decipher ancient scripture. Anything? Purbright asked. Mally looked up. Sir, I've been sorting through the Hoxie estate documents. And something strange, the signatures, some match perfectly, too perfectly. Too perfectly? Purbright repeated softly. Yes, sir. They overlap precisely as though traced. Purbright sat down. Then Mr. Perks may have discovered forgery. That would give someone a reason to silence him, Mally said quietly. Purbright looked at the triangular newspaper resting on his desk, still patient, still enigmatic. If he found a forged signature, he said slowly, he would need proof. Something he intended to confront someone with, something small enough to fold into a newspaper. And someone got to him first? Perhaps, Purbright murmured. Or perhaps he never had the chance to show it. He rose. Sergeant, we must find that visitor in the bright scarf, and anyone with a reason to keep a forged signature buried. Across Flaxborough, as evening settled, the gossip swelled anew, full of teal scarves, disappearing papers, and a smile that refused to explain itself. But Purbright knew the truth was out there, in the small, stubborn details others overlooked. And tomorrow he intended to tease out the one thread that would make the whole pattern unravel. It was just after 9 the next morning when Sergeant Mally hurried into Purbright's office with the strained expression of someone bearing news that refused to wait until the kettle had boiled. Purbright, who had been studying the triangular fold of the Chronicle for the 100th time, raised an eyebrow. "Sir, there's been a break-in." Purbright set the newspaper down. "Where?" "Perks's office." That sentence alone carried more weight than any elaboration. They walked briskly to Perks and Blundy, the street strangely subdued, as though the town understood instinctively that something had shifted, the sort of shift that promised scandal disguised as clerical inconvenience. Miss Cranley met them at the door, cheeks flushed with indignation. "I knew it the moment I saw the filing cabinet," she declared. "It was interfered with." Purbright inspected the cabinet. Its drawers were closed, its locks unbroken, its polished metal undisturbed. Only when he opened the top drawer did he notice the anomaly. The files inside had been arranged too neatly. "Someone tidied?" he asked. "Exactly," Miss Cranley said, folding her arms. "I do not tidy during office hours. It sets a dangerous precedent." The files bore subtle signs of disturbance, papers squared with unnatural precision, dividers aligned as if by ruler, one folder slightly newer looking than the others, as though it had been removed and replaced with ceremonial fastidiousness. Mally bent to inspect the lower drawer. "Sir, nothing's missing." "Not even a paper clip," Miss Cranley added grimly. Purbright examined the newer folder. "This was touched recently." "That," Miss Cranley said, "is the Hoxie estate folder." "Of course it was. What was inside it?" Purbright asked. "Documents relating to Mr. Pym's inheritance, the property papers, the affidavit Mr. Perks insisted existed, the banking statements, the probate forms. Was the affidavit there yesterday?" "I didn't check," she said reluctantly. "I avoid looking into that folder. It contains the sort of paperwork that spreads melancholy." "Please step outside, Miss Cranley," Purbright said gently. "We need a moment." When she had left, Purbright opened the folder carefully. The papers were arranged with such unnatural precision that it took him a moment to recognize the abnormality. The affidavit itself was absent, if it had ever been there. But the real discordance lay with a single sheet, a bank statement whose signature block had been smudged, as though a finger had brushed too soon across wet ink. "Sergeant," Purbright said quietly, "do you notice?" Mally stared. "It's been handled recently." "Not just handled, examined." Purbright replaced the sheet. Someone came searching for the affidavit, and failing to find it, inspected the next most incriminating document. "A forgery?" Mally asked. "Possibly. Or perhaps the bank statement's signature differs subtly from the others. If Perk suspected forgery, he would compare them carefully. And if someone feared discovery, they'd come looking," Mally concluded grimly. Purbright closed the drawer with a soft click. "A tidy burglar is an anxious burglar." They interviewed the staff, Miss Cranley, Mr. Blundy, the cleaner who arrived at dawn, and a junior clerk who had a face permanently arranged into apology. None had seen or heard anything unusual. No locks were damaged, no windows forced. Whoever entered had either possessed a key or knew precisely when the building would be empty. Outside, a group of townsfolk had already begun forming. Mrs. Portwhistle, who had the uncanny ability to appear wherever secrets brewed, inspected the doorway with profound suspicion. "Someone's disturbed the solicitors," she announced, to no one in particular. And things do not become disturbed without cause. Purbright continued past her without comment. As they walked back toward the station, Mally said, "Sir, this isn't a random burglary." "No," Purbright agreed. "This is someone searching for a document they cannot admit exists, and someone who knows how to leave very little trace." "Miss Dale's teal scarf visitor?" "Perhaps. Or someone who wishes us to believe that." They reached the station, where a constable intercepted them. "Inspector, Mrs. Hedgeworth insists on speaking with you, says it's urgent." Purbright sighed inwardly. Urgent matters from Mrs. Hedgeworth generally involved her neighbour's dog thinking menacing thoughts, or children skipping too close to her rose beds. She sat in the waiting room like a queen receiving an inferior ambassador. "Inspector, I have information," she declared, "which may be relevant to your unfortunate dead man." Purbright inclined his head. "Please." "Yesterday morning," she said, lowering her voice, though no one else was present, "I saw a woman walking toward Market Hill, tall, wearing a long grey coat and," here she leaned even closer, "a very bright scarf." "Teal?" Purbright suggested. Mrs. Hedgeworth blinked. "No, yellow. I know my colours, Inspector." Purbright kept his face neutral. "Anything else about her?" "She walked with purpose," Mrs. Hedgeworth said. "Purpose is suspicious, and she nearly collided with my hedge." When she left, Mally murmured, "Another scarf? Another colour?" "Indeed." Purbright returned to his office, the triangular newspaper waiting on his desk like a riddle too polite to be insolent. He lifted it again, testing the folds. A triangular fold was not merely decorative, it was secretive. Something had been inside this newspaper, something small, perhaps a paper fragment, perhaps a signature sample. Whatever it was, the burglar had not retrieved it. Which meant Perks had carried evidence with him when he died. Purbright sat back, feeling the town's quiet rhythm pulsing through the window panes. There was no panic in Flaxborough, merely curiosity, sharpened by routine. And in that curiosity lay opportunity. People who believed themselves unnoticed often remembered most vividly. He stood suddenly. "Sergeant, fetch P.C. Harrowby, we're returning to Market Hill." At the bench, Purbright retraced Perks's final moments once more, not because he expected revelations to bloom suddenly, but because the bench was the only place where Perks's thoughts might still cling in ghost-like fragments. He sat in the same position, held the newspaper as Perks might have held it, imagined the solicitor's anxious gaze, scanning the square for the approaching figure. Footsteps sounded behind him. It was Harrowby. "Sir, Cosgrove says he remembered something. A scrap of paper blew across the square that morning. He thinks it fell from Perks's lap." "What happened to it?" Purbright asked. "Cosgrove says a woman picked it up, gave it a look, then put it in her handbag." Purbright's eyes narrowed. "Did he recognize her?" "He did, sir, Miss Vesperdale." A gentle, inevitable click sounded in Purbright's mind, not the sound of guilt proved, but the sound of the next door opening. He rose from the bench, brushing dust from his coat. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "find Miss Dale and be polite. People who enjoy attention also tend to hide things behind theatrics." The breeze shifted as if listening. Somewhere in Flaxborough, a single piece of paper, no larger than a hand, was waiting to be found, and Purbright intended to find it before the person who cleaned Perks's filing cabinet returned for a second search. Purbright moved through the late afternoon with the steady, thoughtful pace of a man who understood that haste rarely caught truth. It merely startled it into deeper hiding. Miss Vesperdale, despite her dramatic temperament, was not the sort to flee Flaxborough. She enjoyed being observed too much. Still, the matter of the paper scrap demanded a tactful conversation. He found her on Tanner's Lane, returning home with a bag filled almost entirely with sheet music and, incongruously, a single cucumber. "Inspector!" she exclaimed, lifting her chin as though posing for a portrait she had commissioned. "Have you discovered the culprit? Or at least an interesting rumour? I do so detest dull ones." "Neither," Purbright said kindly, "though I do have a question concerning a loose scrap of paper you retrieved near Market Hill." Her expression froze, not guiltily, but theatrically, like an actress pausing before delivering a crucial line. "Oh, that little thing, I thought it was rubbish." "Most significant clues begin life as rubbish," Purbright replied. "May I see it?" She hesitated only a moment, then sighed. "If it advances the cause of justice, though I assure you it contained nothing thrilling." Inside her home, amid the musical clutter, she rummaged through a handbag large enough to hold an orchestra. At last, she produced a tiny, crumpled scrap, white, with a few faint markings. Purbright accepted it delicately. A corner torn from a document. A sliver of a signature line remained, the curl of a letter just recognizable enough to suggest forgery. Not proof yet, but a whisper of it. "Where exactly did you find this?" Purbright asked. "Near the statue," Miss Dale said. "The wind nudged it toward my ankle. I thought perhaps it was a note someone had dropped, but it was disappointingly small." "You didn't show it to anyone?" "Inspector," she said, dramatically offended, "I am not one to cheapen evidence through gossip." Purbright did not comment on the fact that Miss Dale would have happily delivered a 4-part lecture on the subject had she known it was evidence. Instead, he slipped the scrap into an envelope. "Thank you. This may help us." "Oh!" she exclaimed. "So it is important?" "Potentially." He left her beaming with satisfaction, though entirely unaware of how narrowly she had avoided deeper suspicion. For now she seemed merely a collector of oddities, not a creator of them. Back at the station, Purbright placed the scrap beside the triangular newspaper. 2 fragments from 2 different moments of Perks's final day, both tied to documents someone desperately wanted to find or destroy. Mally entered, rubbing his forehead. "Sir, we've got the witness list from the businesses around Market Hill. Most saw nothing. One said she saw a man in grey, another swore it was a woman in blue, and one elderly gentleman is certain Perks was smiling at him specifically. It will be a challenge, selecting the truths from the embellishments," Purbright said. "Flaxborough often remembers itself more vividly than reality." Mally dropped into the chair opposite. "Sir, do you think Miss Dale's telling the whole truth?" "I think," Purbright said, "that Miss Dale is telling the truth as she wishes it to be, which is not always the same thing as what occurred." The sergeant frowned. "She's dramatic, but dangerous." "People can be dangerous in ways they do not intend," Purbright said softly. "But at present, I suspect her part is peripheral." He rose and walked to the window. The street outside wavered with lazy movement, shoppers drifting, bicycles wobbling, the town's slow pulse continuing despite the intrigue woven through it. "Sergeant," he said, "consider this. Perks discovers a forgery. He confronts someone. They respond poorly. A document goes missing. Perks tears up a paper in frustration. He arranges a meeting. He folds his newspaper into a triangular signal, a shape distinctive enough to be recognized by someone expecting it. And someone meets him," Mally continued, catching the thread. "Takes something from him, leaves him there." "Quite possibly," Purbright murmured. Mally shifted uncomfortably. "But then, why was he smiling?" Purbright paused, holding the envelope containing the scrap. "That," he admitted, "remains the question that steadies my thinking. Men do not smile at the moment of betrayal unless they believe they have already won." "You think he set a trap?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps he believed he had evidence that would destroy someone's lies. Or he thought he was meeting an ally." Mally frowned deeper. "Or maybe he didn't know he was dying. Or didn't expect to," Purbright said. "Poison can be subtle." The sergeant's eyes widened. "Do you think he was poisoned?" "That depends," Purbright replied, "on whether the doctor has yet realized what he saw." Before Mally could process that, a knock sounded. P.C. Harrowby entered, holding a notebook. "Sir, the chemist has something." He remembered Perks buying a small bottle of tonic last week, something for nerves. "Nerves?" Purbright repeated. "Yes, sir. He asked if it mixed safely with tea." Purbright's mind sharpened. "And did it?" "The chemist didn't know. He told him to follow the label." "And did Perks seem nervous?" "He did, sir. Looked as though he hadn't slept." Purbright dismissed Harrowby with thanks. When the door closed, Mally said, "If Perks was nervous, perhaps he wasn't planning a trap. Maybe he was frightened." "Frightened men do not fold newspapers like coded messages," Purbright replied. "They clutch them." He tapped the table lightly with his fingertips. "Sergeant, we need to understand Perks's mind in those last hours. The smile, the folded paper, the torn scrap, the meeting. These are not the actions of a terrified man. They are the actions of someone who thought he held an advantage." "Unless," Mally said slowly, "he only believed he held one." Purbright smiled faintly. "Which is the more dangerous kind?" As evening drifted in, Purbright left the station for a brief walk. Sometimes movement loosened thought. He passed the shop windows, the fading lamps, the statue of Alderman Rusby standing sternly against dusk. He paused at the bench again, imagining Perks there, upright, waiting, watching. Perks had not been careless. He had been precise. If he folded the paper, it meant something. If he smiled, it meant something. And if someone wanted those documents enough to break into an office, they believed the documents still existed, which meant they feared Perks had not handed them over. But he had handed something to someone. Purbright's gaze drifted across the square toward the home of a man who had a great deal to gain from inheritance, and a great deal to lose if a forgery emerged. Mr. Horace Pym, a nervous man, a fretful man, but perhaps a desperate one. Purbright turned back toward the station with quiet resolve. Tomorrow he would test Mr. Pym's nerves, and nervous men, he knew, often revealed more truth than they intended. Purbright arrived at the council offices the next morning with the polite, almost apologetic air of someone calling on a neighbour rather than a suspect. The receptionist directed him to Horace Pym's small, paper-laden cubicle, where Pym sat hunched over a stack of files, as though attempting to hide behind them. His face brightened at the sight of Purbright, an unfortunate reaction for a man about to endure questioning. "Inspector." "Oh, dear, is this about the inheritance again? I assure you I haven't pressed Mr. Perks for updates since he passed." Purbright rested his hat gently on the edge of the desk. "Nothing so formal, Mr. Pym. Merely a chat. Might I trouble you for 10 minutes? Pym looked around as though hoping the papers might shield him. "A chat? Here? Should we move somewhere less likely to be overheard?" "That would be ideal," Purbright said. They settled into the council tea room, a cramped, earnest little space whose biscuits tasted exactly as they looked. Pym poured tea with trembling hands, splashing only once, which Purbright considered a small personal triumph for him. "You seem unsettled, Mr. Pym." "Unsettled? No, merely warm. The radiators here are terribly enthusiastic." Purbright allowed the silence to stretch just long enough to coax more truth into it. Then he asked, almost casually, "Mr. Perks mentioned to several people that he was looking for a missing affidavit. Did he ever show it to you?" Pym nearly dropped the teapot. "Show it? Me? Good heavens, no. If he'd found it, he would have finalized the inheritance. I assume so." "You were quite persistent about the matter." Pym's ears reddened. "Persistent, yes, but only in a legal sense. I wasn't pestering him. Well, not excessively. My uncle died nearly a year ago, Inspector. I simply wanted closure." "Closure," Purbright repeated softly. "A curious word. It can mean so many things." Pym swallowed. "I assure you, Inspector, I never argued with Mr. Perks except about the paperwork, and that was civil." Purbright sipped his tea. "You were seen raising your voice." "Oh, that was hardly an argument. I thought he'd misplaced a letter of mine. Turned out he hadn't. I apologized." "And the day before his death?" "Day before? Oh, yes, I stopped him outside the bookshop. Only for a moment. I simply asked whether he had made progress." "And did he say anything unusual?" Pym hesitated. He said some things were becoming clearer, that he expected to have everything sorted very soon." Purbright watched him carefully. "That must have pleased you?" "Well, yes, though he didn't look pleased himself. He looked anxious." "Did he tell you why?" "No, Inspector, and I didn't like to pry." Purbright set his cup down. "Mr. Pym, may I ask you something directly?" "Of course," Pym whispered. Purbright leaned in slightly. "Have you ever lost an envelope? One you thought you had delivered?" The question landed with the soft weight of a feather, but Pym reacted as though struck by a hammer. His cup clattered in its saucer, tea sloshing dangerously. He blinked rapidly, opened his mouth twice, closed it again, and finally managed, Why do you ask?" "Only that missing papers seem to be a theme in this matter." Pym pressed a hand to his forehead. "Oh dear." "Oh dear, Inspector, I didn't want to mention it because it makes me look terribly careless." "I never object to carelessness when it tells me something useful," Purbright said calmly. Pym inhaled shakily. "I posted an envelope to Mr. Perks 2 weeks ago, containing a statement he asked me to sign. but the next day he said he never received it. I didn't want to admit that I forgot to seal it properly." "You mean it may have fallen out?" "Yes. Somewhere between my house and the pillar box. I checked the pavement twice. I even asked a child if he'd picked it up. He asked if there was a reward. I wasn't sure what the going rate for honesty was, so I gave up." Purbright considered this. A missing envelope lost somewhere in Flaxborough containing a signature Pym might have copied poorly, or someone else might have taken interest in. "And did you rewrite the statement?" Purbright asked. "No, Mr. Perks said he needed the original." Purbright let the silence settle again. Pym began fidgeting with a teaspoon, twisting it nervously. "Mr. Pym," Purbright said gently, "you seem frightened." "I'm not frightened," Pym said, clearly frightened. I don't know what you think I've done." "I think," Purbright replied, "that you've done very little, and that you are hiding only incompetence, not malice." Pym sagged with relief so visible it almost made Purbright pity him. "But incompetence," Purbright continued softly, "can sometimes enter dangerous territory when signatures and inheritances are involved." Pym's face went white. "Inspector, you can't possibly think I forged anything." Purbright didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, "Did you ever see your uncle's will?" "Yes, but only after his death. Mr. Perks read it to me." "And the signature?" "Looked perfectly normal. I mean, as normal as Uncle Lionel's handwriting ever was. He had a flourish that made his name look like it was trying to escape the page." Purbright allowed himself a small smile. "And on the affidavit?" Pym stared blankly. I never saw it." "Interesting," Purbright murmured. Pym braced his trembling hands against the table. "Inspector, if someone forged something, I swear it wasn't me. I barely have the nerve to sign my own name when witnesses are present." Purbright nodded. "I believe you, but someone forged something, and Mr. Perks knew it." Pym looked down at his tea. "Then he was in danger." "Perhaps," Purbright said. "Or perhaps he believed he could rectify the matter without confrontation." Pym's lip trembled. "Does this mean the inheritance will be delayed even longer?" Purbright regarded him with patient amusement. "Mr. Pym, at this moment your inheritance is the least of my concerns." "I see," Pym whispered. Purbright rose. "Thank you for your time. Your honesty today, even accidental honesty, has been helpful." Pym blinked rapidly. "Does that mean I'm not a suspect?" "It means," Purbright said, collecting his hat, "that you are no longer the easiest one." He left Pym sagging over his teacup, a portrait of anxiety in human form. Outside, the air carried the faint chill of an approaching evening. Purbright paused on the steps of the council building. Pym had given him something unexpectedly valuable, not motive, not guilt, but a gap, a missing envelope, a signature wandering somewhere in Flaxborough, a piece of paper someone desperately wanted, someone bold enough to search Perks's office, someone frightened enough to argue behind the bookshop, someone confident enough to walk through the square wearing a bright, memorable scarf. Purbright turned toward Market Hill. Somewhere among these scattered details lay the person who had silenced Edwin Perks, and Purbright, with quiet clarity, felt himself getting closer. The late afternoon sunlight draped Market Hill in a mellow gold that did nothing to soften the town's curiosity. Purbright stood at the edge of the square, his eyes quietly surveying the familiar landmarks, the statue of Alderman Rusby, the greengrocer's stall, the tea rooms, and the bench where Edwin Perks had sat with his mysterious smile. He had returned not for nostalgia, but because something here still spoke, softly, stubbornly, and in fragments. He approached Mr. Cosgrove, who was arranging apples in symmetrical rows with the solemnity of a surgeon at work. Cosgrove noticed him and sighed as if summoned again by fate. "Inspector, if you've come for cabbages, you're late. The best have already been judged by Mrs. Porter and found morally inadequate." "I'm here about the scarf," Purbright said gently. Cosgrove's eyebrows lifted. "Ah, the person in the bright scarf that morning." "Yes. You mentioned you saw them near the bench." "Only briefly, Inspector. They moved like someone with somewhere urgent to be. Could have been a woman or a man. Hard to tell with those long coats these days." "And the scarf?" "Oh, very bright," Cosgrove said decisively. "Red!" Purbright nodded, though he felt no satisfaction. Another colour, another misplaced certainty. "Are you quite sure?" he asked. Cosgrove paused, squinting as though reviewing his memory with a magnifying glass. "Well, possibly more orange, but bright, very bright." Purbright thanked him and moved on toward the tea rooms, where Mrs. Blenkinsop sat with her eternal companion, a pot of tea she had never been seen finishing. She waved him over eagerly. "Inspector, I was hoping you'd come. I remembered something from that morning." "Please," Purbright said, seating himself. "You see, when I passed the bench, I noticed a person standing a short distance away. Very striking scarf, blue as summer sky." Purbright kept his expression steady. "Blue?" "Absolutely, I know blue. I wear blue every Wednesday." She gestured proudly to her outfit, which was indeed blue. And this scarf matched perfectly. "And the person wearing it?" "Oh, I didn't see their face. They turned quickly when I approached, very shy or guilty or cold." "Cold?" Purbright asked. "It was breezy," she said defensively. "Anyway, the scarf fluttered so dramatically I nearly tripped over it." Purbright allowed her to finish her tea before moving on. At the doorway, Mr. Blee from the bookshop appeared with his usual air of resigned disapproval. "Inspector," he said, "if you're looking for the person in the green scarf—" "Green now?" Purbright asked mildly. "Well, perhaps teal," Blee conceded. "In certain lights. They walked past my shop that morning, carrying a small envelope." Purbright considered this. "You're certain it was an envelope?" "Yes, because they tapped it against their palm while waiting to cross the street. People with envelopes always look guilty, in my experience, and they always tap them." Purbright thanked him and stepped outside again. Teal, green, blue, red, orange, the colours shifted depending on the teller. But the common ground was brightness, a scarf, deliberately noticeable. Yet worn by someone who didn't want to be recognised. A strategy, perhaps. Hide invisibility, knowing memory distorts specifics. He walked slowly toward the bench, passing the statue and the shadowed patch of ground where the scuff marks remained faintly visible. He crouched again, tracing the marks with a thoughtful fingertip. 2 feet, slightly angled. Someone had stood very close to Perks, close enough to pass something, or take something. "Inspector!" He looked up to find Mrs. Portwhistle marching towards him with an air of urgency that rarely boded well. "I remembered something else," she declared, "about the person I saw that morning." "The woman in the yellow scarf?" "Yes, the very one." She stopped briefly near the bench, bent down actually, picked something up. Purbright straightened carefully. "Picked something up?" Mrs. Portwhistle nodded. "A paper scrap. Only she looked at it for a moment, then tucked it in her coat and walked off briskly. But it wasn't Miss Dale. This woman had darker hair. A new detail. A dark-haired woman with a bright scarf. Someone retrieving evidence, perhaps. Someone who arrived before Miss Dale and found one scrap Perks had not torn small enough. "Would you recognise her again?" Purbright asked. Mrs. Portwhistle sniffed. "I recognise everyone, Inspector. except those I choose not to." Purbright returned to the station, his thoughts knitting themselves into firmer patterns. Mally met him at the door. "Sir, we've got something." Purbright paused expectantly. "The librarian came by. She says Perks borrowed handwriting reference books because he suspected a forged signature, but she also remembered something else. Someone else asked about handwriting books the day before Perks did." "Who?" "A woman. She didn't give her name, but she wore a bright scarf." Purbright felt the pieces tighten. Slowly, subtly, they were forming a shape. "We don't have a description?" he asked. "Just that she spoke very politely and asked how one could compare ink strokes." "Ah," Purbright murmured. A polite threat behind a polite curiosity. He entered his office. On the desk lay the triangular newspaper, the torn scrap, the notes from witnesses. The puzzle was not yet complete, but the edges were sharpening. Perks had discovered forgery. Someone else suspected he had discovered it. And both had consulted the library for verification. The bright scarf was not a fashion accident. It was a diversion, something that ensured witnesses remembered the colour, not the person. Purbright leaned back, hands folded. Who in Flaxborough had reason to fear a forged document coming to light? Not Pym, too frightened, too genuine in his foolishness, not Miss Dale. She enjoyed attention, but she was not precise enough for forgery nor subtle burglary. Someone with access to legal documents, someone who might stand to lose money or reputation if a signature were exposed as false. Someone who could enter Perks's office without signs of forced entry, someone who might hide behind politeness like armour. Purbright opened the Hoxie folder again. The signatures, too perfect, too identical. There, in the bottom left corner of one form, the subtle indentation of a heavy pen stroke, one he recognized from another context entirely. A council official, a clerk known for pristine records, a person known for visiting the library frequently, a person seen walking briskly from the direction of the solicitor's office, a person who always wore scarves, bright scarves. Purbright closed the folder with the soft, decisive sound of truth drawing nearer. The polite, smiling figure of Miss Harriet Blundy, junior solicitor and co-owner's niece, came sharply into focus. A woman with access, a woman with motive, a woman precise enough to forge and tidy enough to break in without disorder. And a woman, he now realized, who had been very careful to avoid him since Perks's death. Purbright rose slowly. Tomorrow he would stage a small meeting, polite, calm, just enough to disturb a guilty heart. And perhaps the bright scarf would appear again, this time with its wearer unable to conceal what it truly meant. The next morning arrived pale and cool, a thin mist hanging above Market Hill, like a curtain anticipating its own rise. Purbright walked with deliberate calm toward the tea rooms, where he had quietly arranged for Miss Harriet Blundy to happen upon him. He had sent no formal invitation, just a courteous message via the solicitor's office requesting a brief word at her convenience. Such phrasing, he knew, would compel a conscientious woman like Harriet to choose the soonest possible moment, if only to prevent imagined impropriety. When he stepped inside, she was already there, seated neatly at a corner table, her coat folded precisely, her handbag positioned with mathematical exactness. Around her neck was a scarf, muted today, a gentle violet, quite unlike the bright ones described by witnesses. Purbright took note of the detail without comment. "Inspector Purbright," she said, rising, "you asked to see me?" "Only briefly," Purbright replied. "I appreciate your time." They sat. The tea room hummed with its usual subdued gossip, citizens pretending to discuss weather and politics while keeping their ears bent discreetly toward the pair. Harriet's posture remained impeccable, her hands folded tightly, but not tremulously. controlled, but tense beneath the surface. "I understand," Purbright began mildly, "that you were involved in several of Mr. Perks's recent cases." "Yes," Harriet said. "He was handling a number of probate matters and I assisted in the administrative process. Perks was efficient, though prone to unnecessary fuss." "Fuss?" Purbright echoed. "He insisted certain documents be rechecked, even when they were clearly in order." She took a sip of tea. "He had grown particular in his habits lately." "Particular how?" "Oh, just over-meticulous. He would examine signatures repeatedly, even on trivial paperwork." She paused, as if regretting the faint criticism. It was very unlike him. "Did you notice any change in his behavior besides that?" She hesitated. He seemed distracted, and once I thought he looked afraid. But perhaps I misinterpreted fatigue. Purbright watched her closely, then reached into his coat and withdrew a sheet of paper, one of the duplicated signatures from the Hoxie file. He placed it between them. "Does this look familiar to you?" Harriet studied it, her expression unreadable. "It appears to be Mr. Hoxie's signature." "Does it, though?" Purbright asked softly. She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The librarian informs me," he continued, "that someone besides Mr. Perks requested books on handwriting analysis last week. She couldn't recall the name, but she remembered the scarf." Harriet's composure tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I see," she said, choosing her words with care. "Inspector, handwriting analysis is not a crime." "No," Purbright agreed, "but one usually studies signatures only when uncertain of their authenticity, even one's own." She frowned. "Are you suggesting—" "Not at all," he interrupted politely. "I merely wondered why two people working in the same office grew independently curious about handwriting at the same time." Harriet's fingers tightened around her cup. "I cannot speak for Mr. Perks." "No," Purbright said, "but perhaps you can explain why someone broke into the office after his death, why the Hoxie folder was examined and returned with greater neatness than before." A faint flush rose at her collar. "You think I—" "Inspector, that is a serious accusation." "It is not an accusation," Purbright said. "It is an observation. Few people arrange documents so precisely. Even fewer return them exactly where they belong." Harriet looked away briefly. "Tidiness is hardly evidence of wrongdoing." "No," Purbright said gently. "But tidiness can conceal it." A silence followed. Light, fragile, but telling. Harriet reached for her teaspoon, though she did not stir her tea. "Inspector, what exactly do you believe happened to Mr. Perks?" "I believe," Purbright answered simply, "that he confronted someone about a forged signature. I believe he arranged to meet that person in Market Hill carrying evidence concealed in a folded newspaper. And I believe that evidence was taken from him." Harriet's breath caught. "That is not, Inspector, you can't be certain." "I'm not," Purbright said quietly. "But I am certain Mr. Perks died believing he had trapped someone." The smile was not serenity, it was victory, or the anticipation of it. The teacups clinked faintly as a waitress passed. Harriet's heartbeat seemed to echo in the stillness between them. "I also believe," Purbright continued, lowering his voice, "that the forged signature was not Mr. Pym's doing. His anxieties are far too genuine. But someone else had both opportunity and skill, someone who handled Perks's legal documents every day, someone who knew exactly where to find the missing affidavit, and perhaps feared that Perks had found it first." Harriet's eyes widened. "You think I forged?" "Miss Blundy," Purbright said, still calm, "I think you are in a difficult position. I think your uncle, Mr. Blundy, may have asked you to assist with a signature he believed harmless, a small correction, a clerical formality, but when Perks noticed the inconsistency, he would have insisted on reporting it. She froze. Her silence was not confusion, it was recognition. Purbright softened his tone. If your uncle forged the original document and you helped the forgery appear consistent, you may have been drawn in far deeper than you intended. Harriet looked down at her lap, her voice trembling. Inspector, you don't understand. My uncle, he wanted to protect the firm. He said Mr. Hoxie's original affidavit was mistakenly destroyed, that recreating it was simply maintaining continuity. And you believed him? I wanted to, but Mr. Perks, he grew suspicious. He asked too many questions. He said he had proof the signature was wrong. Purbright leaned back. And what did you do? Nothing, Harriet cried, too loudly. Several patrons turned. She lowered her voice quickly. I simply tried to convince Mr. Perks that the matter was benign. He refused. He said he intended to bring it to the council. So you met him, Purbright said, in Market Hill. No, she whispered. I swear I didn't. I walked past earlier, yes, but I never spoke to him there. I only followed him to the bookshop alley the day before. I begged him not to report it. He said he couldn't be part of deception. And the bright scarf? Purbright asked mildly. She looked stricken. I wore a teal one that day, but everyone saw it. That's why I didn't wear it again. Conveniently memorable, Purbright said, and conveniently disorienting to witnesses. Harriet shook her head. I didn't harm him, Inspector. I only argued, that's all. Purbright studied her trembling hands, the mask slipping. She was frightened, yes, but not guilty of murder, not by her own measure. Miss Blundy, he said gently. Who else knew Perks suspected the forgery? Her silence was answer enough. Purbright rose slowly. Thank you. You've been very helpful. Harriet lifted her eyes, wet at the corners. Inspector, please, if you confront my uncle, be careful. He is proud, and pride is dangerous when cornered. Purbright gave a small, solemn nod. I know. He stepped out of the tea rooms into the cool air. The mist had lifted. The square was clear, sharp-edged, waiting. He now knew who had worn the bright scarf, who had forged the signature, who had panicked when Perks began asking questions, and who had the most to lose if the truth reached the council chamber. It wasn't Harriet Blundy. It was the man who had taught her how to be precise. Her uncle, Mr. Leonard Blundy. Purbright began walking toward Perks and Blundy with a calm, steady purpose, ready to deliver the one comment that would unmake a guilty man. Purbright approached Perks and Blundy with the unhurried composure of a man returning a borrowed book, rather than confronting a murderer. The building looked as it always did, quiet, orderly, determinedly respectable. Only Purbright seemed aware that beneath its tidiness something fragile and guilty trembled like a pane of glass in a draught. He found Leonard Blundy in his office, spectacles perched low on his nose, reading correspondence with an air of careful, slightly exaggerated absorption. He looked up slowly, offering the sort of polite smile that one might give to an insurance inspector, cordial but guarded. Inspector Purbright, always a pleasure. How may I assist you? Purbright took the seat opposite him. I've been going over Mr. Perks's files again. Blundy closed the correspondence, folding it into a perfect square. Tragic business, his passing, but natural causes, I understand. Natural, yes, Purbright said softly, though not in the way one normally means. Blundy's fingers froze for only a fraction of a second. An expert might have missed it. Purbright did not. I'm afraid I don't understand, Blundy said carefully. Purbright reached into his coat and withdrew the triangularly folded chronicle, placing it on the desk between them. A curious fold, wouldn't you say? Not Mr. Perks's usual style. And yet he carried it with him to Market Hill. Blundy raised an eyebrow. People fold newspapers in all sorts of ways. Of course, but Mr. Perks never did. He preferred rectangles, crisp, methodical rectangles. Purbright lowered his voice, except when he wished to hide something. Blundy's stillness deepened. Purbright continued. The triangular fold concealed a small paper, a torn piece, likely part of the affidavit he believed someone had forged. Blundy blinked. Forged? Inspector, you are leaping. Not at all, Purbright said. I merely follow the lines others try so hard to straighten. He placed the tiny scrap, retrieved from Miss Dale, on the table. Blundy's gaze flicked toward it involuntarily. This, Purbright said, was found near the bench, one corner of a signature. Enough to reveal, if one knows how to read such things, that the stroke was traced, a careful tracing, very careful, almost invisible. Blundy exhaled once, a controlled, shallow breath. I'm not sure how this concerns us. It concerns you, Purbright corrected gently, because you created the forgery. A silence followed, a still, brittle kind like ice forming on a pond. Purbright leaned back. You knew the Hoxie affidavit was missing. Whether it was misfiled or destroyed, I cannot yet say. But you chose to recreate it. A minor act, you told yourself. A harmless, administrative repair. Blundy's jaw tightened. You have no evidence of that. Not enough for a courtroom, Purbright agreed, but more than enough for truth. He tapped the scrap again. Perks suspected. He checked signatures, he borrowed handwriting books, he confronted someone behind the bookshop, and he decided to bring it before the council. Blundy's eyes hardened. He told you that? No, but he told Miss Dale, indirectly, and he hinted as much to Pym, and you, I imagine, knew he was preparing something unpleasant. Blundy swallowed, the movement stiff and mechanical. Inspector Wotiti, whatever Perks believed, it was misguided. No one was harmed. The estate was small. The discrepancy trivial. Trivial to you? Purbright said softly. Not to Perks. He took the law seriously, as do most honest solicitors. Blundy's hand twitched. I don't appreciate the implication. Purbright continued as though he hadn't spoken. You met him that morning in Market Hill. Blundy's composure cracked, barely, but definitively. I walked through the square, yes, but I didn't. You wore a bright scarf, Purbright said calmly. Blundy's eyes flashed confusion. I don't wear bright scarves. Not usually, but you borrowed one from your niece. Harriet had not said so in words. She hadn't needed to. Purbright had seen the gap where one scarf had once hung on her coat stand, the faint line of dust, the hesitation when asked about colours. Harriet had not worn the teal scarf again, but Blundy might have, thinking it inconspicuous in a way only the guilty convince themselves it is. Blundy's breath quickened. Inspector Purbright, you're constructing fantasies. Am I? Purbright asked quietly. A man was seen in a bright scarf, a woman also, a tall figure, a shorter one. But the scarf was constant. A deliberate distraction, perhaps, something that would confuse witnesses, something you would consider clever. Blundy rose abruptly, anger surfacing in his eyes. This is outrageous. I demand— Sit, Purbright said gently. It wasn't a command, but Blundy sat. Purbright folded his hands. Mr. Perks believed he had cornered you. He folded the newspaper to hide the scrap that proved the forgery. He expected you would relent, perhaps apologize, perhaps attempt to explain away your error. Blundy's voice came out strained. I didn't know he carried anything. You did, Purbright said. You argued. People heard raised voices. You insisted he was wrong. He insisted he was right, and you reached for the newspaper. Blundy's face drained. Inspector, listen. You took the scrap, Purbright continued softly. Or tried to, but Perks had already torn the original evidence days before, hiding pieces in different places. You retrieved one piece. Miss Dale picked up another later. Others may still be out there. Blundy pressed a shaking hand to his forehead. You don't understand. I only wanted to protect the firm. A scandal would destroy us. And to protect yourself, Purbright added gently. You feared the council, you feared exposure, but you didn't mean to kill him. Blundy froze. A terrible, quiet stillness. Purbright said, almost kindly, the tonic Perks asked the chemist about. It was harmless in small doses. In tea, however, mixed with the nerves of a troubled man, it might cause dizziness, collapse, even stoppage. Blundy whispered, it wasn't poison. No, Purbright agreed. But it might as well have been. You brought him tea, a gesture of civility. You hoped it would calm him, give you time. But it relaxed his muscles, including the ones that held him upright. The smile was unintentional, just the tonic's lingering effect. Blundy stared at his hands. Inspector, I didn't mean, he wasn't supposed to. He just slumped. I panicked. I thought if he looked peaceful. You arranged him, Purbright finished quietly. Folded his hands, straightened his hat, removed the paper scrap, and walked away. Blundy bowed his head. The fight drained from him completely. Harriet wasn't involved, he whispered. She only helped with the repair. She didn't know what it meant. I know, Purbright said. There was no triumph in his voice, only inevitability. Mally entered quietly at Purbright's nod. Blundy offered no resistance. As they escorted him out, Purbright lingered alone in the office a moment longer, gazing at the shelves of immaculate files, order covering frailty, neatness hiding foolishness. Later, after the paperwork, after the murmurs of disbelief spread through Flaxborough like ripples on a pond, Purbright returned to his desk. He placed the triangular newspaper beside the small envelope containing the torn scrap. Outside, Market Hill resumed its ordinary rhythm, fruit stalls chatter, bicycles wobbling along cobblestones. Life, as it always did, moved politely past scandal. Purbright reached for his pen, the smile on his face faint, tired, and entirely free of mystery.